Hello, everybody, and welcome to another segment of the Real Michael Pittman Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pittman, and joining me on the show today is a remarkable guest out of Florida by the name of Ann McNeill. We've had an opportunity to visit before we started the show here, and I'm just enthralled by the things that she's done and her approach to doing things. It's just great to have her on the show. I wanted to read a little bit about her, but man, I just want her to tell you who she is and what she does. But Ann, thank you, first of all, for coming on the show. And, you have a very extensive resume and some of the things that you've done. I'll just do a couple little drops out there. Ann has been in the construction industry for over 40 years. I believe it is over 40 years. And she's also the founder of the National Association of Black Women in Construction, which is created as a pipeline for Black women in the public, private sector and entrepreneurs and in school, with the school objective being for Blacks to study STEM. And thank you for coming on the show. And can you expound a little bit more in terms of some of the things that I talked about here in terms of what you've done and, how you've gotten to this point? It's just so much, and we might need to do 4 or 5 shows to get you all in.
Well, thank you so very much, Mike, for the opportunity to share. But I do believe that each of your listeners and all of us basically must have a dream in order to have a dream come true. We must have a dream in order to have a dream come true. So when we talk about my story and how did I get here, it was simply starting with a dream. And I have one of my favorite books to my left here, your right, and it's entitled Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, which I read the book 1979, 9 p.m. December 31st, and realized that I had never really thought about how much money do I want? What would I do to get the money? And by when? And having a plan. And so that was the genesis of my journey into the construction industry. I have an undergraduate degree in accounting, a master's in finance, and I went to trade school where I was working on my master's. And with the yes, and this is in the 70s, and my friends laughed because, for me, from reading this book and understanding the stories of so many successful people, it was not so much about the degrees that they had, it was about the desire that they had. And that desire was a burning desire to either be, do, or have a better quality of life, not just about the money, but in every area of the life. But the money matters, because oftentimes the money gives us choices in order to do that which we desire. So my journey started in corporate as an entrepreneur and studying to pass that general contractor's exam, but being introduced to a Black contractor early in my career by the name of Thacker, who owned Thacker Construction out of Alton, Illinois, that moved to Atlanta and built, yes. So the Thacker name probably, right? From the 70s and 80s. I think he passed in the 80s. But just the family, along with the Russell family, because they were all side by side, if you will, when Black Enterprise was doing the top, 100, and they would be neck and neck. But my journey started there in just the realization that construction was an option. And even though, we go to school and get these, great degrees and this great education to go into a corporate world, seldom are we taught to come into entrepreneurship and not just have jobs, but also create jobs for others. And that was one of the things that you and I talked about early on in the conversation, pre-show conversation. But being on that journey, I realized that even in my corporate job, I was the only Black and the only female. And I'm going back into the 70s now, 72, 3, 4, 5, 6. But the only Black in that corporate space in management. So naturally, as I looked around, being in my early 20s, where was I going to go for upward mobility in corporate at that time? And so as I looked outside in terms of opportunities, my husband and I started very young buying property. And like I shared, we bought the house we lived in, we bought the house across the street, we bought the house down the street. So young and naive, not realizing the transition in the community that was happening. And this is how I ended up in construction in a serious way. And I tell people that my husband graduated valedictorian, and that's where we met. And I graduated, thank you, Lordy. Some of you will get that later if you're
Yeah,
younger.
I got it.
But yes, and so so I married up. I married up, and I have a lot of respect for my husband. I even to this day, I think he's one of the smartest men, if not the smartest man I know. And I came home from work one day. We both worked in corporate, and he said to me, calls me baby, he said, "Baby, if I had to do it all over again, I would not go to college." And I was shocked. And I said, "Couldn't go to college." I'm standing in the doorway as I just walked in from work. And he said, "Yes." I said, "Why? Why wouldn't you go to college?" He said, "Think about it. If I had to do it all over again, I would go to trade school and start a construction business." I said, "But why construction?" Because, back in the day, we were taught that that was not professional thing to do, right? Our parents wanted better for us, and it was not construction. It was go to school, get a good education, and get a good what, Mike?
Government, good paying, good government paying job. That's what they used to say. Good.
Yes, good government job or good corporate job.
Yep.
Good corporate job or good government job, and that's what we were taught. That's what I was taught to do. So I did that, and I couldn't figure out why was I so deeply in debt. But that day, when he said he would go to trade school, and he said, "Listen," he said, "look at it like this. I did the math, babe." He said, "I did the math. These guys that come in here to give us quotes, they didn't finish high school, so they went to a trade school, and they're giving us these quotes to do this construction repairs, all these different repairs." And he said, "I did the math, and what they make in 1 hour, in 1 hour, is more than you make on that corporate job." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Yeah, think about it." He said they went to trade school and they started a business. And he said they make more in an hour. He said, "I'm looking at the rates." And he said, "It's more than you make in a whole day on that corporate job." And it didn't take me a minute, Mike, to do the math, because I respect him so much that I knew whatever he was saying, that I trusted. And I said to him, standing right there, I said, "I'm going to go to trade school." He started laughing. He said, "You kidding me, right?" I said, "No, I'm going to go to trade school." And so that was in the 70s, and that's what I did. While working a corporate job and with the family, I went to trade school and working on my master's in finance at the same time. So now fast forward the journey, the 79, 80, whatever riots happened in Miami at that time when the city was torn. And that's how Thacker and other companies, black companies, started coming into Miami to help rebuild. And I decided to take a leave of absence from my good corporate job and to come into construction so I could learn the business side of the industry. And so fast forward, where we are now, I am the first Black female contractor in our state of Florida operating at the level that I do, focusing on billion-dollar programs. Not the projects anymore as much as I used to, but I focus on the programs now in the billions, because that is where the money is.
Man, well, talking about, I guess now you've paralleled up, looking back, or what were some of the major projects, if you will, that you worked on as you moved up with your company and your career?
Well, some of the major projects, I set a goal actually while inside the firm as an entrepreneur. I had to begin to learn the business of the business. I tell people might run 5 businesses. The first business that I had to learn was the business of my skill in terms of this industry. What was I selling? And the second business was the business of the operations of the business. So in learning these different skill sets and these different businesses, prior to getting to the point to where I could work, first of all, have the mindset to focus work on major projects, flagship projects. And I learned from Floyd Thacker, actually, he and Russell ended up being number 1 and 2 Black businesses in construction during that time, late 70s to 80s. And late 70s and 80s. And so he would never look at anything underneath the $500,000. Had to be $500,000 and above. Why? Because they were partnering with white firms, and it had to be large enough to make it beneficial for everybody to make money. So when I started looking at projects with $500,000 and below, because I still had a job, and $500,000 and below. And as I began to learn how to do the business of the business. And the reason I talked about the 5 businesses is because one of the businesses that we're in this industry that we seldom talk about, is the business of relationships. The business of relationships in your business. And so for me, the business of relationships meant this. I would physically go to a pre-bid. I would follow up with every single person at that pre-bid. I would make sure that I had a relationship with the agencies by industry. Why is that important? Because many years later, when I formed the National Association of Black Women in Construction, I understood the benefit and value of industries. What's an industry? Aviation, transportation, ports, healthcare, energy, water, transit. So now, having that history of the relationships in the industry, because the industries is another business that we're in, Mike, that we seldom talk about. What does that look like? Let me go back to your question though. Flagship projects. So right now I'm sitting in Miami, and my desire 25 years ago was to ensure that every flagship project, major public sector in this county, my goal was to be on that project. And sometimes it took 5 years, 10 years, and I'm on one right now that took me 30 years.
30 years.
30 years, but I'm on it. Could I get a virtual high five? 30 freaking years. Yes, but I'm on it. And I have a team of people on it. Why? Because I set a goal and focus. So from the Science Museum to the arenas, to the airport, to the seaport, to transit, all different industries. And I've worked on all of those major flagship projects here in my county.
Wow. Now you mentioned the National Association of Black Women Contractors, and as a result of you being, in this industry, tell us a little bit about that organization. When did you form it? Are there chapters throughout the country? How does one become getting involved in it, and maybe some of the major events or things that you all do?
That's a lot. Okay, let me start with the beginning. So after being in the construction industry for about 20 years, I started, noticing that many of the major firms had one of us. Many of the major associations had one of us as Black women behind the scenes, in control and in charge of many responsibilities that ran that organization. So I started realizing that even though I saw them, I didn't see very many Black women in construction. So I started just collecting cards. I talk about Think and Grow Rich, and I have been in the book since '79. So I'm very big on goal achieving, not just goal setting, but goal achieving strategically. And so I set a goal to just 1 year just collect cards, and then the next year I said I'm just going to communicate, and then the next year I said let me just call people for lunch, and then the next year it turned into a little bit more, like having lunch once a month. And but never thought of this idea of forming something tangible or organized, but had an inkling. And I just felt that God was calling me to do something. But I ran for 10 years, and I know it was 10 years because I had a lady call me. Her name was Crystal Faison out of Maryland. And she called me up one day, and I had been praying to God, asking really what is he? Kind of like the story from Nehemiah that said, I heard the voice of God calling, saying, "Who can I send and who will go for us?" And I didn't answer that voice. I didn't answer that voice because I didn't think it was calling me. And so this lady called me up and she said, "God told me to call you." I was sharing this story on a TV program earlier today. And every time I tell it, I laugh. And she said, "God told me to call you and you're supposed to help me." And it's just a lady random out of the blue. And I said, "No," I said, "God didn't tell me that." But in fact, I had been praying that prayer of Gideon that said, "I'm going to put out the fleece. And this is really you calling me to do this thing. And I want you to make it wet and everything around it dry. You've got to show yourself to me." And so when she called, I did not connect the dots to say that this was him literally calling me. And so I said to him, "Ma'am, I don't really know you, but, and for those of you who are listening to this, if you're spiritual, from especially Black families, we have this thing that we say, well, let me pray about it." Like, like, anybody like that. I'll pray about it. And that's, in other words, that's code for just keep stepping because, you know. So she called me back the next day and she said, "Did you pray about it?" "No, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't pray about it. I really forgot." So she said, "Ma'am, I'm serious. Let me share with you my story." She said, I'm a nurse. I passed the general contracts exam in my state. I live in Maryland, and I started my construction company, and these guys, they just keep taking advantage of me, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I've just been praying to God for help. And he told me to go to Google and Google Black woman in construction. And the first person that came up, I want you to call them and tell them that they're supposed to help me. I'll help you, she said. And so she said, I did what the voice told me, what God said to me. And, we all have different names for God and we all hear him differently. And that was her story. And she said, and I went and I Googled Black woman in construction. She said, "You came up number one. And God said that I'm supposed to call you and you're supposed to help me." And I said, "Ma'am, I this is all I know. I can share with you what I've done if you're willing to do what I've done." And she said, "Sure." Now, the interesting point about this story, though, Mike, is the fact that oftentimes, and I can't speak for anybody else but myself, I will, think I'm talking to myself about something until I begin to learn, how do I hear the voice, whatever you want to call it for whoever's listening. And so that night I said to her, when she called, I said, "Listen, are you familiar with," I started listing all the organizations, them, ABC, AGC, all these. She said, "No, I've never heard of those." And I said, "Pick one, pick ABC, call them and see when they're having a meeting." She did. And she called me right back. And she said, "They're having a meeting tonight." I said, "Great, you should go." She said, I can't afford it. I don't have any money. I said, "Call them back and see if somebody would sponsor you, if you can come as a guest." She said, "Okay." She called them and called back. Now, this is where the story becomes, you cannot make this up. They told her to come. She goes and gets lost, finally finds the place for the dinner, walks into the room. She calls me later that night and explains this to me. She said, "I walk in the room and it's packed, all white men. One empty seat and one white woman in the room right next to the empty seat." She said, "I walked in, sat in the seat just quietly because they were already well into the meeting. And when I sat there, the lady turned to me." This is her sharing her story with me. And she said the lady was very nasty. She looked at me very angrily and she said, "Who are you and why are you here? Who invited you here?" And she said, I was shocked the way she was receiving me, because we're the only two women in the place and there are no other Blacks and no other women, just the two of us. She said, "I didn't know what to say. And the only thing that could come to my mind," she said, my mentor told me to come." And the lady said, "Well, who is your mentor?" She said, "Ann McNeill." And the lady, this is Crystal's experience. She said everything about the lady changed. She said, and all of a sudden the lady said, "Ann McNeill from Miami." I don't know the lady from Adam, but for the mere fact for her to know of me now, during the time I sat on the diversity board for ABC for probably about 15 years. So she maybe knew of me, but then the lady turned and switched and embraced Crystal and said,
Mm,
tell Ann I got you and I will mentor you.
mm. Wow.
So now, fast forward the story. It's all in the same week, Mike. Now I get on my knees that night and I say, and everybody listening, do not judge me. Don't judge me. I got on my knees that night after that story and I said, I don't know if this is you, God, talking to me. Because if you're calling me to pull together Black women in construction, you got to show yourself. I need to make absolutely sure without a doubt that this is you talking to me. Because God, you don't know Black women like I know Black women in this industry. You're laughing, Mike, but I'm serious. This has got to be a call from God, literally. And so, in all honesty, I on my knees, I said, okay, I asked like Gideon, I'm gonna put the fleece out. I want you to make it wet and everything around it dry. Now tomorrow I'm gonna put it out again. I want you to make it dry and everything around it wet. You gotta show yourself. The next day, you cannot make this up, Mike. Cannot make this up. The next day, I'm at my office, which is I'm sitting in now, going about my business. The phone rings. My secretary answers. She says to me, the guy's name is Brian, Jewish attorney here in Broward. He calls me up and he said, Ann McNeill, do you know this lady? Her name is Lisa Cologne Herring. I said, nope. He said, well, I'm interviewing her. She's the first African-American construction attorney in the state of Florida. And I'm thinking about hiring her. And I asked her if she knew you. She said, yes, she's in your mastermind group. So I'd like to, continue to interview her, but I was wondering if you could meet us for lunch. I said, sure. He said, how about, the next day, which was going to be Friday? I said, sure. Same week. I'm not connecting the dots. I go to lunch. I get there very early. As soon as she walks in with him, I recognize her immediately. We're sitting having lunch at Morton. And all of a sudden, Mike, he leans forward. And he said, Ann, whatever happened to that Black woman in construction thing you talked about, you wanted to start? I said, excuse me? Now I'm like the man on the Damascus Road where the donkey is talking, right? And I said, excuse me. He said, we were in Tallahassee for ABC and we were standing in the hallway in front of such and such's office. And you were telling me about this idea, this vision that you had years ago, that you wanted to pull together this organization for Black women in construction. Whatever happened to that? And all I could say, Mike, again, was excuse me, because now I'm feeling convicted. Same week, the fleece is put out and he is talking directly to me saying, I told you this is what I want you to do. And the man keeps talking. He says, listen, I will be he said, my law firm will be your first sponsor. My law firm will take care of all your legal work. And then he turns to Lisa and he said, and I decided sitting here, I'm going to hire Lisa. He said, don't you need a vice president? That was the beginning of what we now know as the National Association of Black Women in Construction. So very quickly, I had to put the old lady finger up. Not that I was old, the church lady, I'm sorry. And I had to say, excuse me, I got to go to the ladies' room. But I had to go, Mike, to the ladies' room and I had to repent. I had to repent down on my knees and say, if this is really you calling me to do this, and I get chills every time I share this story. I said, God, you got to reveal yourself to me. You got to draw by your spirit those spirits that are like you. You're really calling me to do this. And then I had the nerve to say, and I need you to draw away from me those spirits that are not like you. As I began to get up off my knees, no joke, I was convicted. And this is what I heard as audibly as I'm talking to you. I heard these words. My son, Jesus Christ, had Judas. How do you expect to get out of this without yours? Come on, somebody. My grandma used to say, And I have had them. And because I knew they was coming, come on. Why? Because I know that this vision, Mike, is so much larger than all of us. Think about, where can a Black woman go who did not finish high school? 5, 6 kids, children. Where can she go and not have to wait for her baby daddy? Come on now, somebody. Where can she go and work and make 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, $20, $30, $50 an hour without a high school diploma? Construction.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's a public job, you go into the trades and you become an equipment operator. You're almost making $100 an hour. All you need is a certification, inspection certification. You don't need a degree, high school diploma. You don't know. And so right now, Mike, we are focusing on building a pipeline into this industry, but we're elevating the brand of construction, an honorable profession. That is who we are as Black women in construction. I sit on 4 pillars. Black girls, because we're going back now into not just the high school, but junior high school, elementary school. Why? Because these decisions are made very early with the technology the way it is now and STEM. So we're encouraging Black girls to come into the industry and starting to study and think about this industry. Black women who are entrepreneurs, who are in the profession in the private sector that control procurement. That's the second pillar for which we stand. And the third pillar are Black women in the public sector and a lot of these government jobs, and they're in control of procurement, engineering, all of these different areas. And then the fourth pillar of this stool, if you will, all up underneath this umbrella called NABWIC, are the rest of us, Black women who are in the trades, we're in construction, we're in the profession, we're entrepreneurs, and put all of that together with the politics. I cannot think of any other area that's as powerful as Black women in all of those areas, focusing on and in the construction business, but also every single industry. That's who we are. That's what we do.
Yeah. And, when you talk about that in terms of the trades, historically, like we were saying earlier, and like you just stated, in terms of go to college, get you a good education degree and go get a job. But when you look at some of these trades, being whatever it is, you're in this, if you're a pipe fitter, if you're a carpenter, if you're a electrician, if you're HVAC or whatever, these jobs make a lot of money. And not on top of that, the skills that you learn, in those jobs, in the event that you say, I want to start me a side hustle. Everybody don't know how to build decks. Everybody don't know how to put in furnaces. So I'm going to start me a little side hustle. Next thing you know, that dwarfs into a business that you own. Now you have other individuals that you can hire. So I can see the importance that I didn't see 20 years ago of being able to be in the trades and being able to gain this experience, because like education, once you learn these things, nobody can say, I'm going to snatch it away from you. Or you can't snatch away how I know how to wire a house. You can't snatch away how I know how to build a deck. You can't snatch away, how I know how to finish concrete. You can't snatch away how I know how to operate heavy machinery. And not only from wherever you're at, but anywhere in the country, you can take those skills, because construction happens not only in this country, all over the world for that matter. So once you're able to gain those skills and become a journeyman, if you will, if in fact you're in the trade union or whatever, I mean, you pretty much got it made from there, as long as you do the things that you need to do. Now, you have to put up with some stuff on some of these places, depending on where you're at, what state you're in. If you're a young Black person in the trades, and if you're an apprentice, some of these places that, it's a good old boy network, and they'll do anything they can to try to get you out. I know a guy who was in the trades as an electrician. I think he was a 3rd-year apprentice, and was working on the job, and guys basically told him, hey, Ian, hand me that wrench over there. He said, excuse me? He said, you heard what I said, Ian, hand me that wrench. Well, after about 4 or 5 punches later, he dropped the guy. And so then they wanted to extend his apprenticeship, but not do anything to the guy who basically called him, the N-word or whatever. So he got very disgruntled, got out of the trades, but still, did some other things along those lines. So, but those are some of the things that I look at that you have to go through. And I look at all as a part of training, to be thick-skinned. Not when I'm saying that, not let nobody hit you or do anything to that nature, but it's some things that you're going to have to take because of the industry that you're in and because of the history of it. But once you get past that, man, it's you got a pretty good road ahead of you. And especially if you take the business aspect of it and say, man, I want to start my own business and start employing people. Now, you become a H.J. Russell, or become, I mean, so many things that you can do, and they all started somewhere. So I commend you in terms of what you're doing and what you see in terms of being able to, to have Black women involved in this type of thing. And like you said, not even having a high school degree and to go in and make six figures, that you can take care of your kids, take care of your family, and create some generational wealth. Now, having said that, when you talk about business in terms of what are some of the major hurdles that you see that maybe that you overcame, and that you see that you would say that, hey, once you get in this, these are some of the things that you're going to have to overcome as well.
As you were talking, Mike, I wrote mindset, and you talked about getting a skill set and not having to be concerned about something taken away. And one of the favorite books I read many years ago was The Jewish Phenomenon. And it talked about how Jews focused on the education, and it was something that they knew could never be taken away. So mindset, I think, is one of the struggles and trials and tribulations of many of us. I tell people, I used to tell people a long time ago, I say, my body is free, but is my mind still enslaved? My body was free, but was my mind still enslaved? And again, I keep going back to this book, Think and Grow Rich. I'm a lot of books, and in the beginning, I would read 20, 30 books a year, but by industry and by category, and begin to focus on the struggles and challenges I was having. I was able to mentally overcome very quickly because I was able to see things differently. Trials, struggles, challenges, I began to see them differently, like lifting weights. We lift the weights for the body, but how does it look to lift the weight of the mind and the spirit? It's called a challenge, a struggle, a problem. Why? Because one of the things I learned in this book, Think and Grow Rich, and some of the other books that I've read, is that when you have a problem, find somebody else with the same. As a matter of fact, that's how I started my first mastermind group. I had a problem making money, and I found other people who had a problem making money. And then we came together, formed a mastermind group according to Napoleon's book, and actually wrote a book on it. And this is the book, How to Start and Operate a Successful Mastermind Group, right? I wrote 3 books on this subject, but my point, though, is the struggles and the trials. This is what it looked like: not having payroll, not having experience, not having qualified people, not having access to the resources such as bonding and a lot of people that I needed. But because of the mastermind concept, this is how I began to overcome, and still overcoming to this day, but at a different level. I began to align myself with individuals, number one, who had the same problem, but at a different level, who had found a way to overcome that particular problem. So let's take, for example, a problem that I had was in estimating. I had bad estimators. But from masterminding that concept, the idea came up, well, identify individuals who are great estimators in some of these white construction companies and align yourself with them. And from doing that, I got involved with an organization called ASPE, Association of Professional Estimators. Went to my first meeting, and yes, went to my first meeting eons ago, and ended up, first night, I walk in, I'm the only Black person in the entire room, tall white guy, his name was John Bennett, and he was like 6'11", I'm 5'1". Yeah, he's like almost 300 pounds, and I walk in the door, and he looks down at me with this bass voice, and he said, "Hey, little lady," basically, "Are you lost?" And I wasn't lost. I came for that meeting, and he started laughing, and he took me around to everybody, introduced me to everybody in that room. And let me tell you what happened out of that. Now we're talking about struggles, trials, and tribulations. Do something See, first we must identify what's the struggle, what's the trial, what's the tribulation, and then do something by aligning yourself with like-minded, like-spirited people who are doing what you want to do. So I had an estimating problem. I went to an estimating association, and this back in the fax days, fax came on my fax machine saying it was going to be a meeting. I didn't know it was the first meeting. When I walked in, sight unseen, a room full of white men, no females in the place, and they asked me to be the secretary. First night, I said, sure. But what that did for me, Mike, is it put me in the boardroom of all of the estimators for all of the firms that I couldn't get a return call from. Come on, somebody. And I would meet with them every month in their boardroom. And this is what I began to happen. I became one of the fellas. Guy sitting next to me was from Turner, and he would say, hey, Ann, we've been this job. Can I add you to our team? I didn't know what that meant. I just knew to say yes. My mom said, always say yes. My wife was going to give something, always say yes, take it home. And if you don't want it, give it to somebody else. So when opportunities come, I say yes. If I can't use it, I give it to somebody else. Come on, Mike. You know, when you used to, my mom was a maid, they give her food, they give her clothes, toys, broken bikes, and she bring it golf clubs. That's how I started playing golf in the 9th grade. Only person in my whole high school that had a set of golf clubs hand me down. Come on now. 1969, 1970. I don't think Tiger Woods was thought about by then. But anyway, so struggles, trials, and tribulations, Mike, from masterminding, as I began to identify the problem. Let's talk about money. People don't want to talk about this publicly. I was on a panel last week and people were shocked that I said this, right? Yes, I'm free. I can say whatever I want to say because it's the truth, and I want to free some people to be honest and be truthful. So, Mike, let's talk about money. I never borrowed money from the bank because my credit was so bad. I never missed the payroll. Why and how? Because I said to a friend when I was struggling and I couldn't find friends that could even loan me $1. And one guy said, well, you know, I know this liquor store around the corner. So I said, liquor store? I said, you kidding me? He said, no, Miss McNeill, that's where I go get my check. And it's a Jewish guy and he's really nice. He said, let me introduce you. And I said, okay. Mike, let me tell you something. Oh, I almost called the guy's name. Oh, gosh. Saved my business. And this is what it looked like. Every Friday, I knew my payroll was going to be $2,000. I would go and I say, listen, can you hold my check? Come on now, can we talk? Can we talk? See, people talk about wanting to walk in your shoes and my shoes, but what does it really look like when you can't make payroll? What does it really look like when you cannot get a bond? What does it really look like when you cannot get a return call? I was on a project where I called a guy for 52 weeks. He never called me back. And then I heard he was going to be at a conference on one of the largest projects in my state history. And I got there 3 hours early as they were setting up the room and asked the organizers that they know this guy. I said, yes, yes. And I said, can you point him out when he walks in? And I wait till the guy walked in. He put his bag down, right? First seat on the front row. This was $1 billion train. I wait till he walked away. I put my handbag right next to his seat. And I called this guy 52 weeks every Monday morning at 8 o'clock. I wait till he came and sat in his seat and he was getting ready to start. We're all wearing, name badge, Mike. I told him about 5'1", right? This guy had to be 6'7", 6'8", tall white guy. I wait till he took his seat and I walked up to him. I put my right hand out. He's sitting. So if he's sitting and he's tall, where's his eyes going, Mike? Right to my what?
Name tag.
Do you think he recognized? He may not recognize his face, but do you think maybe he recognized that name? No joke, Mike. No joke. This is $1 billion train that's going to be coming to Florida. I'm going back 20 years ago. But my point is, whatever your trial, struggle, do something. When that man saw my name tag, no joke, he literally went down on one knee. I had his hand, I said, hi, my name is, he looked at my name badge and he said, oh my gosh. And he went down, literally, knee to the one knee down. Yeah. Like the ball players on the football field when they got one knee
Yeah.
down. That
Mm-hmm.
man went down on one knee. This is what he said, looking up at me. He said, I am so sorry. I said, I never called you back. That one interaction put me in a relationship with that company, which was Fluor Construction. Fluor, 10, 15 years worked with them because of that one visit. So when you talk about trials, struggles, and tribulations, have the mindset to see it for what it is. It's an opportunity to grow, like lifting weights. And the more struggles and trials and tribulations you have, the more buff, come on, Mike,
Mm-hmm.
the more buff you become because the more you can handle. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually say, what life, what else you got? Bring it on. And it does. And you smile as you know, take it. But you become stronger, but not for yourself, but in the spirit of service to others. Because if I had never gone through anything, when women in construction or women or whoever come to me with anything, or I been there, done that, let me share with you what I've done, what you can do differently in terms of mindset shift and thinking. Let me go back to the liquor store. And my payroll grew to $60,000-$70,000 a week.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. My grandma used to say, mm.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And that guy carried me for years.
The liquor store guy. Oh my goodness.
I'm not joking. And
Wow.
so again, we don't talk about this publicly because it's as if well, your brother, your uncle, you know, they go cash their check. Come on, that's how the check whatever those check
Oh,
cash.
currency exchange. Yeah.
Yeah, because they started looking at wait now, liquor store making all the money off these neighborhoods. So why can't we make some of that money? When you have families to feed, as long as it's legal, ethical, and moral,
Hmm.
I have no
Wow.
debt. I have no debt. I'm free. I used to tell people my partners, unofficial partners, used to be workers' comp and the IRS. Come on, Mike, you know what I'm talking about. Tell the truth and shame the devil.
Oh my goodness.
Say what now? Say what?
I say, oh my goodness. I'm just yeah.
Am I right?
Yes, you are.
Yes, I am. And so, first time I got ordered by the IRS because I did not know I could not tithe from my company.
Business.
Yes, the guy came and he said when he first showed up. Now I'm thinking and I'm growing rich because everything's mindset. So now I'm reading a lot of stuff from Proverbs to you name it. I'm reading everything to get ready for this appointment because I don't know what he's going to say. But this is what I knew. People will go out of their way to do business with people they know, like, and trust. People will go
Mm-hmm.
out of their way to do business with people they know, like, and trust. And everybody want to be respected and honored. And one of the books I read, it might have been something dealing with people skills, how to win friends and influence people, something like that I was reading at the time. And so I had the mindset that when this white guy walked into my office to interview me, audit me for the IRS, this is what I said. I shook his hand. I said, I am so excited, Bob, to see you, and I'm so excited that you're here.
Hmm.
He looked bewildered. He said, excuse me, I'm here to audit you. I said, yes, and I'm excited. Well, why are you so excited? Nobody's ever been excited. I said, because obviously I have done something that I'm not supposed to do. He said, that's right. And that's why I'm here. And I said, and because that has happened and I did not know, I said, I'm excited because you're going to help me understand how to do that differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said, yes, I am. I said, that's why I'm excited. Have a seat. Let's get to work. And it was pleasant and he was kind and he shared with me how to do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. And
Wow.
so, yes. So as I said, Mike, before this podcast started, we can go anywhere. And I haven't even talked about the things we talked about before we came on the podcast. So if you want to do a part two, or if you want to, but again, this industry is such a powerful industry. And I just want to make sure that all of your listeners are clear about the fact that if you have children, you have grandchildren, nieces, nephews, everybody's not going to go to college. There's a different path for everybody. Everybody. But there's something for everybody in the construction industry, whether they become lawyers, professionals, CPAs, carpenters, laborers, anything you can think of. And I think Mike would agree with this. You can find that skill in this industry. Healthcare, whether you are a nurse, whether you're doctors, whether you sell water, you sell food, everything you can think of is purchased in this industry. Would you agree, Mike?
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Most
Yeah,
definitely.
yes. And so consider uh, connecting with us. Black Women in Construction is called NABWIC.org. NABWIC.org. Mike, when we talk about struggles and challenges, but I hope the couple that I mentioned is helpful to your listeners, because again, we all will have struggles, challenges, and opportunities to grow. But how do you see it will determine how you respond to it. Does that make sense? How you
Mm-hmm.
see it, if you see it as an opportunity for growth, you will look for the growth in it. If you see it as a problem to come up underneath it and have it bear down on you, it's hard to see coming up out of it. And so for me, being a positive thinker, I just look for opportunities to grow others through my experiences of the trials and tribulations that I've had the privilege and the honor of experiencing, because I know that God would not give them to me without the ability to overcome.
Yeah. And you talked about associations and networks, those expressions that your network determines your net worth. And in terms of individuals, Black women in particular, that have these, excuse me, that have these particular type of partnerships, if you will, with individuals, with people, with organizations, and the importance of having these relationships. Where are some of the places that you feel that you can go in mass to be able to get some of the relationships that that you talked about? I guess that are outside or countrywide. You talked about the Black Enterprise Conference, which I used to go to. I used to take my kids when they were small, and I
Yes.
remember my kids being in the Kiddipreneur program with Earl Graves, and we used to take them there, and they really had a great time because they were there and they were learning about business. They were with like-minded individuals. It was just a great time, and they were 9 or 10 years old. My sons got pictures with Earl Graves, when he was like 9 or 10 years old. But he was, they were very engaged, and I think it's important for our kids to be able to be exposed to those type of things. But I know we got the Black Enterprise Conference. I know George Frazier does a conference every year, and I had an opportunity to interview him when I actually had a newspaper. I used to publish a newspaper at one time as well. I have one of the top Black newspapers in the country as well. But talk about some of those particular type places where you can go and get those type of networks that maybe in the construction industry or just outside the industry that you would feel would be beneficial to women such as that.
Well, the first thing I would suggest, Mike, to anybody and everybody is pick a lane. Pick a lane. And a lane would be an industry. And I'll just use transportation as one example, just one example. Transportation, if you pick a lane in transportation. So first, let's start back with, I talked about there's 5 businesses that you're in. And if any of your listeners want to connect with me, Mike, and I'll say this and I'll repeat it, but you can connect with me by texting the number 59925. 59925. Just put Ann in the chat. 5 businesses that we're all in. The first one is the skill set. Now I'm going to go to your question about where can people go. So skill set, let's say that I am a painter. I'm a painter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a painter, but I'm just going to use this as an example. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one business. What skill are you in the construction industry? So let's say you're a painter. It could be painter, plumber. It could be whatever. But I'm going to choose painter. And so let's say that you are a painter, I'm a painter, and Mike is a painter. And we're at a construction conference called ABC, Associated Builders and Contractors. Most of us know that organization, right, Mike? ABC? Yes, he's saying yes. And a contractor walks up who is a school builder. A general contractor, white, walks up, and all he does is build schools. You're a painter, I'm a painter, and Mike is a painter. And we're at an ABC conference. Contractor walks up and he says, to you, what do you do? And you say, I'm a painter. And the contractor says, well, what do you paint? You say, listen, I paint everything. What do you have? I can paint, airports. I paint seaports. I paint driveways. I paint churches. I paint everything. What do you have? And then the contractor says to me, he says, what do you do, Ann McNeill? I say, I'm a painter. And he says, well, what do you paint? And I say, well, I just paint a little this and a little that. I paint some houses, and I painted some development, a little, something here and there. And my friends, they have a painting business, and they let me paint some things for them. But then he asked Mike, what do you do? Mike say, I am a painter, but I only paint schools. And he says, I only paint schools in Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County in the state of Florida. And not only do I paint schools, but I'm a member of the board of the Painters Association. And I am also friends with all of the inspectors in the 3 counties. And now which one of us painters is this school builder going to choose, even though Mike's price is just a little bit higher? Which one of us is going to choose?
You're going to choose the one that paint them schools.
He's going to choose Mike.
That's
now,
right.
I share that story because when you ask about an association, not only should you pick a skill, that's the first business that you're in. The second business that you're in is the business of your operations. I just had to tell you I had an audit from the IRS because I didn't know back then that I could not tithe to my church from my business. I had to tithe it from my salary. Found that out the hard way. So you need to know the operations of your business. That is a business by itself. The third business that you're in is the business of your industry. That goes to Mike's question. He says, what association should the person go to? It depends. And I said that, if you're a painter and you're painting in the transportation space, then you want to go to the APTA conference. You want to go to TRB conference, and you can Google all these acronyms. You want to go to ACI conference. You want to go to AMAC conference. You want to go to a COMPTO conference. Why? Because all of those are transportation focused conferences that a painter can paint in those industry which deals with transportation. But transportation is huge. Transportation has transit. Transportation has airports. Transportation has highway and roads. Transportation also has ports. So even within an industry, there's sectors in that industry. Choose one. Become an expert in that one. And so when you do that, then there's associations associated with that expertise and with that industry. So does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So now what I'm doing is, and I coach on this and I have conferences on this subject. Why? Because I think that it's critical that we understand you don't want to be all things to everybody. You want to, I have a workshop that I do. It's called Niche to Be Rich. You want to, come on, Mike, come on.
Yeah, just give me a second.
You want to drill down and niche in your space to be richer. You're already rich. Now we just want to put it in the bank, right? And the way you do that is getting greater clarity about who you are, whose you are, and who do you serve. You can't serve everybody. Pick a lane and pick an industry and pick a niche skill that relates and correlates to those. So those are just some thoughts to help our listeners to really understand and get greater clarity about how to go from this level to associating with people, and then get to the place where they know you, like you, trust you to do business with you.
You talked about your children. Are they involved in your company anyway in terms of a succession plan? When you say, "Hey, I'm ready to hang them up. I'm ready to do something different, and I'm gonna turn the reins over to any of my children"?
No, no, and no. That's another conversation, another podcast for another day. Why? Because you talked about Black Enterprise. So my children attended Black Enterprise for the youth program, and they were in that program probably with your children when there was the repreneur, then there was a teenpreneur and entrepreneur, all of those things that that the family from Black Enterprise would do. So my youngest daughter, her name's Ann McNeill, she branded herself as a baby billionaire. She went entire 20 years. My grandson, who was 7 at the time, he went for 10 years. Now, what ended up happening though, Mike, they all went into my oldest daughter, they all worked with me after a while and decided to become their own entrepreneurs. So my grandson, I'll just give an example. From early 10 years old, he was very clear he was going to become the president of his company. His father owned the technology business and his grandmother owned a construction company, and he grew up in these businesses. So when we would do a word a day. That's an aside for mamas and grandmothers in particular. My grandson would do a word a day. And so what happened then, Mike, is that when he went off to college, already as an entrepreneur, in his fresh sophomore year, he decided that he would leave college. He told us, he said, "I cannot do this. It's interfering with my business." Exactly. And never look back. So my children know they're not in the business, but I think for many of us that have had businesses for a long time, whether we G1s, G2s, or G3s, eventually somebody emerges, or we have an exit strategy where we sell it to the people that helped us build it. And so that's where I am now. You don't know when it's time, if you will, that you're not going to wake up, but at the same time, you want to be responsible and have everything in place. And so we've done that, and we continue to update that. Yes.
And we've been talking here now for about an hour. I promise, that when I set this up, that we would, because I know you're very busy, but I definitely would like to bring you back on.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Numerous times, because you got so much that you can share. And I think we just kind of scratched the surface in terms of all the things that you've done, in terms of the experience that you have and the things that you can impart upon our listeners. Having said that, what would you like to say in closing, a word of encouragement out there for our listeners or individuals that are contemplating going into business and getting in the construction industry?
Yes, I shared in the beginning of the conversation this book, Think and Grow Rich. I have been in this book, like I said, and I host what's called a Black NSA $1 Million Mastermind. But the author asked me those questions, and I like to send it to all of your listeners that's listening. You can text the number 59925 and just put the word "Ann," my name, ANN, in the chat, and I'll send that information back to you. But my book, Mike, How to Start and Run a Mastermind Group, I think can be very beneficial. And I made a commitment to myself. A friend shared with me, he said, "Ann, just imagine," he was very upset because I wrote the book years ago, almost 10 years ago, and would never share it. And he said, "Just imagine you had a family member that had an incurable disease, but you had the antidote and you didn't share. How would you feel?" He said, "That's how I'm feeling right now, because you've had the answer to a problem that I've had, and you would never share." And so from that comment, I am determined to share this best practice. And for those individuals who are looking for a better quality of life, not just in money, but in every area of your life, a mastermind concept with the book Think and Grow Rich, with an organized system that has worked for me for over 45 years, is a proven process. So those are some things that I would like to leave with your listeners. Remember to think and grow richer, but also niche to be rich. And connect with me by texting the number 59925, and then in the chat, just put the word "Ann," ANN.
Yeah, I like that niche to grow rich. That's very appropriate, and I'm going to use that with your permission.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And yes, you will. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Ann, thank you so much for being on the show. And I am going to be contacting you again because I'd like to bring you back on. There's so many areas that just because of time that we didn't touch on that, in our initial conversation that we talked about that we could just go down so many roads that we can go down and keep going. So thank you so much. And I will be in touch with you in your office. And thank you so much for doing
All
the show. I
right.
really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.